Today, as I heard Ariba speak, I started to reflect on my own personal journey towards empowerment. Back in 2009, I moved to Seattle, Washington, utterly clueless about where to get my professional career started. And it was through a network of amazing and powerful women and role models that kind of lit up the way for me. And I'm so happy to see that somebody who was part of that landscape at that time is going to be our main keynote speaker for this upcoming panel. But before I invite her on stage, I want to share some powerful words that I've kept that have guided me for a very, very long time. Years ago, I met Governor Christine Gregoire, who's the governor of Washington State. And in a similar event, she was addressing a group of Pakistani women leaders that were invited by the State Department. And in addressing one of their concerns, which was that things don't look so great for women in Pakistan, sure, but what's happening here in the US? And she said something very insightful. And what she said was, women in power often forget that they are women in power. And they start to pay more attention to general causes, causes that are important to men because they're so frequently talked about. And so often we neglect to bring to the table the things that concern us: motherhood, children, early professional development, returnship paths, and all of that. So she reminded all of us in that room that whenever we rise to power, remember, and to Ariba's words, remember who you are, a woman in power. Today, I have the honor of inviting one such woman in power, our keynote speaker, and we go way back, by the way. I already mentioned that. So excited to see you. Fueling the Fire, Women at the Forefront of Economic Revolution, features Fatima Kardar, who's Corporate Vice President, AI Infrastructure, Partnerships and Marketplace at Microsoft. She is also the sponsor of the Palestinians and Allies at Microsoft Community and supports various industry-wide diversity programs such as the LEAP Apprenticeship Program and Pakistani Women in Computing. The panel is moderated by the esteemed and well-known powerhouse in his own right, Junaid Qureshi, founder and managing partner of MDI Fund. Please welcome, with a round of applause, our keynote speaker, Fatima Kardar, moderated by Junaid Qureshi.
Should I pick a side?
No, I was thinking that side, but now you picked it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm good. So, I think great.
Okay.
I don't like microphones. Look, it doesn't even work. Hello? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. All right. So most of you guys, of course, know Fatima has an amazing career and great introduction of Fatima. But what you may not know, she is the most senior woman executive at Microsoft right now. Muslim woman. Not just woman, Muslim woman. And one of the, and also one of the most senior Pakistanis. There are a few more, but she's one of the most senior Pakistanis also in Microsoft. But what's interesting about her, she inspired to be an astronaut. It wasn't the tech or Microsoft journey that she was planning for. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to be an astronaut and how you got into tech and then how you went to...
What inspired me was I had a Barbie that was the astronaut Barbie. Pretty mundane, but I think again, growing up in Pakistan, my father was in the army, so my life was moving from one place to the other. Really mundane and boring and very limited in view of where things are at. But when I think of girls being inspired, you want big role models, but sometimes even the small things inspire kids. So that's why, while it might seem small, but I feel like sitting I think I got it when I was in second grade in Peshawar. I used to go to the the Army Public School in Peshawar, right? So for a girl who goes to Army Public School in Peshawar to get this and kind of grow from there, I think like it just shows like what things can change. But really, I think that was what I started off, but that is what got me interested in STEM in general, in science, in engineering, in math, because that was really, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be an astronaut. Then I was like, maybe I should be a scientist, maybe, right? All of those things that make you think about all of the hard problems that you can solve that include all of these things. How I got into computer science was actually kind of by accident. I did not know anything about computers. I had never seen a computer. I had never played with a computer. I didn't know that was a thing. But I used to live in Lahore at that time, and I got into LUMS. And so I joined LUMS. I was like, great, I'll do this, then I'll do an MBA, then I'll do something else, etc. But when I got into LUMS, in the first 2 quarters, at that time, like at that point, they only had like 2 majors. Now it's a very big institution. They made everybody do computer sciences. So I had to take a C++ programming course the first semester that I got there. And that was really my first introduction to computer sciences. And thankfully, like this is something that I know now, here in the US, like tech and computers has been always looked at as more of a male profession. I did not know any better, right? I go into this course, I'm like, I'm generally good at things, I'm really good at this C++ thing, I was, I think, second in my class or something, so I was like, I'm better than all the boys, so this is the thing that I have to do.
Second, not first, second.
My husband was the first one. So I made him.
I'm just kidding. You even got the first one.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so that's how I kind of got introduced to computer sciences. That's how I discovered that this is something, not only that this is a field and that I'm good at it and I'm better than a lot of people. So that was really my accidental journey into computer sciences. And then I think I feel like in somehow my life is a series of accidents or happenstances, because after I graduated from LUMS, my entire family was in Pakistan. I had never thought of moving outside the US. That wasn't even a thing I did. And I remember walking down in LUMS, and a bunch of my seniors at LUMS were like, oh, Microsoft is coming to interview, and we're all going to interview, and they're coming to Dubai, so they're going to fly you to Dubai. And I was very excited. I wanted to go to Dubai. So I applied to Microsoft, not because I wanted a job at Microsoft, but because I wanted to get a free trip to Dubai. And I got selected for the interview, but fortunately or unfortunately, that year they decided to fly to Lahore. So I never really got a free trip to Dubai, but I did get a job offer. My interview was at Avari, which was like right there. So I was like, this is a really bizarre thing. But even after I got hired at Microsoft and they gave me an offer, it took me 1 whole year to accept the offer and move to Seattle, because I did not want to move. I was not interested in going abroad. I was not interested in doing a whole bunch of things. So even at that point, my worldview was very different. And I think, fortunately, I had people around me who convinced me, and I had a very persistent recruiter at Microsoft. After repeatedly saying no again and again, they got me through. But even at that point, I think of who were the people that empowered me, that encouraged me, that wanted me to do them? My mother. So honestly, one of the reasons why I got convinced was because the recruiter got my mother on the phone, and then he convinced her that she had to let me come, and she has to convince me to come. So she did that. The other thing that recruiter did was he went to the Muslim community at Microsoft and the Pakistani community at Microsoft, and they said, we have this girl, we want her to come to Microsoft. Will any of you be willing to talk to her? So I actually had a few women who were at Microsoft who were Pakistani origin, one was an Indian origin. They spoke to me and they told me, here's what your life will be. So I think even from that moment, without knowing what it was, without knowing network, without knowing that there are other women who are inspiring me and motivating me, I had that. And so that was really the journey that I had it. Of course, my husband also got hired at the same time, so he convinced me, he was a friend of mine at that point, that we should move here. But that is really the accident in which I kind of ended up at Microsoft. And even within Microsoft, I've been at Microsoft now for 23 years. I thought I'd be there for 2 years, then 3 years, then 4 years, then 5 years, then 5 became 10. And before you know it, it's kind of, it's going to be 24 years this year. So really, it's that journey kind of just grew from there. And like within that as well, I think every step kind of gets me closer to where I feel like, I think this is what Ariba was saying, like women, when you get to a certain position, you think that people are helping you or you're just kind of a cog in the system. And at some point you realize now it's your responsibility. And you have to now think of like what are the people around you and how do you empower them? What were the people that helped me get to where I am? And how do I make sure that I am standing on the shoulders of giants? How do I make sure that the next set of women who are actually going to be doing this kind of stuff, who are struggling, who are unsure, whose parents are saying, go get married, like especially when you go to Pakistan, that's still a thing. Like how do you kind of tell them that there is more and you can do more and here's what we need to do, right? So I think that's really, when I look at my journey, that's maybe a big part of who I am. And if you think about like why I am the way I am.
Wow, amazing. So 24 years of remarkable journey. You accomplished a lot. It's a weird question to ask, but is there anything different that you have learned from your experience you would have done in your journey that you think if people are inspiring to be you would get something out of it? So
I think one thing, this is when I, like, again, growing up in Pakistan, doing computers, like even showing up at Microsoft, you think that your work is the most, sit in your room, write your code, that's what's going to help you. And really, that making sure that you have a network of support, you have allies, you have mentors, you have coaches, people that you can rely on. Nobody expects, that's the thing. People think, especially I feel women think a lot of it is like, oh, I need to know this, I need to understand that, I need to have the confidence in myself. But really, especially when you're new, people expect that you will not know things. And when you see people who come across very confident, who know things, they most likely have a mentor, a coach, somebody who's guiding them. So that's what I feel is very, very important, is make sure that you are connected. That's why I think Open is awesome, and I'm always like, I love supporting Open, is like building a community, building that network. Because nobody lives on an island, nobody does things alone, and you will find people will help you in all kinds of different ways. It's not like, oh, you gave me the job. No, you gave me a piece of advice that changed my perspective on how I think about it, that helped how I did things differently, right? So I feel like all of those things are very important. So that's my biggest thing, is start from day one, get to know people. And it's not about day one, I'm going to find the CEO of my company and talk to them. Get to know people around you, at your level, a few steps above, that kind of stuff. I usually tell people, like at a big corporation like Microsoft, they're like, I want to know the CVP or the CEO. And I'm like, no, you want to know your manager's peer. That is the person that is going to probably guide you the most and have the most influence on you, right? But really be very proactive in building your network and having people who are your allies and in your camp.
I think it's a great one. And we were talking a little earlier about this subject, that it also, you mentioned, it also helped if you happen to be in a toxic environment or in an environment you do need support, is the mentors that help you out, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. When you are, and I'm sure like this is the way things work, you will always be in some environment which is not the best environment, which is toxic. And the most important thing is to find allies. Because this is what I have realized, it is very unlikely that in an entire group, everyone has a particular mindset, but there is groupthink, right? And there is a perspective. And so that when it feels overwhelming that you are in an environment, what you need to figure out is who are the people who are allies, who have the commonality with you, is similar to you. And I think that's where you always start from. And I think that's an interesting thing as well, is most mentorships, relationships, all of this start from a kernel of commonality, right? And I think that's if there's one skill that you want to develop when you try to do network, is how do you, when you talk to somebody, when you approach somebody, how do you quickly figure out that nugget of commonality around which you can build your entire relationship? And that's where first time I talked to Junaid, like he is brilliant at it. So that is a very, very important skill to have.
Definitely. We share something in common. We both are part of a club of two beautiful daughters.
Yes.
So we'll switch gears to motherhood a little bit. You have amazing daughters, young daughters.
Yes.
And at the same time, you have an extremely successul career.
Yeah.
How, and the balancing act is something we have to
Yes.
talk about. I've seen my mother go through it when we were young. She used to work. My wife goes through it also. But are there days where you feel overwhelmed? Like, this is it?
Every day is that. But like one thing before that I'll say that is, Junaid gives me inspiration that at some point my kids will realize what I'm doing. Because right now, like every time I have to leave them, every time where like I have to go do something else or I'm busy, like they see it, especially at this young age, as, oh, you're leaving us again, or why are you doing this, and so forth. And I always I find like that really hard. Like, how do I help my daughters, especially because I feel what I do now is a lot of it is for them, is how do I help them kind of realize that? And it's really hard, right? So what do you tell them? You're not going to sit down and say, oh, you know, mama is a very important person. They're like, whatever. Like, you refuse to let me have Nutella pancakes for breakfast. And that's kind of the thing that I care about. But really, how do you get kids to understand what's going on and why it's important? And so I took my older daughter, they don't care about what I do. They don't care if I go speak somewhere. But I was asked to go speak at Harvard in February. And somehow, I don't know who told my 9-year-old, so please don't judge me, but she has it in her head that she wants to go to Harvard. And so she was like, you're going to Harvard? You're going to speak at Harvard? And so, it was hard figuring out the logistics of it, but I took her with me to Harvard. So it was me and this big tech conference and all these students and a 9-year-olds everywhere. They had a speaker's reception and the faculty and everything is there, and there's a 9-year-old going around with asking people questions like, what math courses did you have to take to get into Harvard? But I think you have to figure out how to balance, and that's where the thing that I've now realized is you have to bring your kids into what you do, because my identity and the person that I am is not just like I am a mother, but this is also a big part of me, and I need to help my daughters understand what it is that I do, why I do it, why it is important. So now I'm trying to expose them as much as I can. But every day is challenging. I will have them come meet you at one point. I think
I don't know about that. As I said, I have 2 daughters. Redundancy is built in. If one fails, the other will do well. So.
No, I keep telling them, like, I have 2 daughters because you have a built-in best friend. And they're like, they're now at the age where they fight. So they're like, she is not my best friend. Like, please don't say that.
I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to give audience a chance, but I'm going to ask you one more question, because you are at the cutting edge of AI, and I'm sure you have many, many secrets, which we are not going to discuss in open right now. But where do you see this this AI is headed when it comes to ethical issues, and what are the things that keeps you up at night, that you worry about?
For me, and I'll step back and tell you a little bit about my journey, especially on the AI side. So what I've been doing, I've been at Microsoft for a very long time, and I've done lots of different things. But for the past 7 years, I was leading technology strategy all up for Microsoft, as I was leading the CTO's charter under our CTO, Kevin Scott. And a big part of our charter was AI, right? It was really about, when you think of the work that we did over the past 6 years, is bringing the company to where you see it in the past year and a half, right? So spent a lot of time on it, did the partnership with OpenAI, looked at all of the things within the company, what we need to do where, so bringing all of those pieces together. And really, this is something that I feel is very, very important, is when you look at AI, when you look at a bunch of the technology, the lens that I always have is, are we building something for the people who live on the west coast of the United States? Or are we building something that will have value to everybody in the world? because the biggest tech companies, even OpenAI, they're all West Coast, they're all US, so it's not even all of US, right? You go to rural Central Virginia, it's a very different world. But really, that's the things that I feel is the lens. Yes, there's the, how do you bring the people together? How do you make sure you can train really large models? How do you make sure Azure does these things? But a big part of what we've done, even at Microsoft, was create what we call the Digital Safety Board. Think of responsible AI principles, because you need them in every single thing of it. But I feel my lens of it is not just that, yes, make sure that there's no bias on race or there's no bias in gender or discrimination, but how do you make sure that sub-Saharan Africa can leverage the technologies that we've built? How do we make sure that we are democratizing what we are doing here in all other parts of it? How do we make sure that in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Indonesia, all of these places, the people can do things with it? So that's where I feel like I constantly, that's a lens that I constantly bring up. Great. But what about this? Are we considering languages? This is one of the things which is interesting, where I keep saying, oh, you are trying to constrain them, because that's the other thing. When AI can do lots of interesting things, it can also do a lot of challenging things. And so the instinct is, oh, let's control it. We will teach it, here's the good things and here's the bad things. And I'm like, why do tech companies on the West Coast decide what the morals of the rest of the world are? Right? Because there is no there is no sense that this is the best way of doing society. There is no guarantee that these are the right morals. People have different cultures, different religions, live in different circumstances, and things differ. And some of the very basic stuff kind of differs in different ways. And so I keep trying, so that's one of the things that I worry about, is how do I make sure that you want to safeguard that, yes, the AI can tell you how to make a bomb, you don't want to tell a child how to make a bomb, and those are important things and you don't do it. But how do you also make sure that if there is somebody sitting in Bangladesh in a village, she is able to benefit from these functionalities as well as somebody who is sitting here, right? So those are the things that I worry about, is how do we make sure this tech is, because really, I can see from where I sit that there is going to be a lot of changes in the world because of this technology. So the question is, how do we make sure that the changes help everybody and not just disadvantage some people and advantage some of the others? So that's really the thing that I worry about the most.
And I think it's more challenging now when these wars and different things are going on to suggest to AI what's right or wrong, as you are saying. And a person like you being in a senior position is extremely critical for those voices to be heard, because today humans do make a decision who is right or wrong based on what background, ethnicity, where they come from. But if people like you don't exist, the other side cannot be heard also.
It is so important. It is absolutely. I have been in things where, because obviously we are a US company, we work with the US government, we work with the US military, and so there are things that we do with them, but I sometimes sit in it and I'm like, I remember I went and talked to my boss and I said, I sat in something with the government. This was the government kind of working with us and saying, here's what we're doing. And I'm like, I'm very uncomfortable with this, because the people that they're targeting look like me. And I am not okay with this. And you have to help make sure that what are our guardrails, what are the things like that. Those are things, one, if I'm not in, somebody like me, it's not just me, but somebody like me is not in the room to say these things. And then I think, two, this is where I feel the speaking up part, because that's what the other thing I find is, you might end up, and if you're doing well, if you're more senior, you might end up in these circumstances. Do you have the confidence to speak up and say this is what it is? And yes, you have to not be naive and have the right finesse in it and kind of approach the right things, but being able to speak up and say this, I am not okay with this, what are we going to do with it? And I think, again, finding the common ground to start with is going to be very, very important. Yeah.
I'm going to pause here. I'm sure you guys have much more interesting questions than I do, but I can keep going on and on. So if there are questions, please raise your hand. Oh, great. Cal Berkeley.
Hello, Fatima. Great discussion, by the way. So it's my question is like an elephant in the room. Because it's debate going on everywhere. The moment last year OpenAI came in. So I have my point of view, but this discussion and this topic brought up in my team also, right? We use a product of Microsoft. So when there is a question of, automating visualization and everything, they're like, oh, someday some colleague says they will take our jobs. So if we automate them, if we introduce this in our team, we will be no more in the company. Although I defer it, in my opinion. So what do you have to say about it?
I think the way I look at AI is always augmented. Like, I think this is why being at Microsoft, I feel like Microsoft's taken a strong stance on it. Yes, jobs will go away, but guess what? When the combustion engine showed up and we were no longer all riding on horses, there were horse carriage riders who lost their jobs because now you needed a different set of jobs. So I think that's the way to think about it. As we have new technological advances, there will be some jobs that will become less or go away, but new jobs will be created, and that's kind of what you want. You don't want to be stuck with a skill set artificially that actually is kind of a democratized, everybody has access to, right? And so what you want to do is you want to learn the next set of skills. And so that's why I look at it, right? One of the big industries that has been changing right now is actually the developers, right? Like the biggest scenario that is most productive is that developers can write code really well. And I've had developers on my team who've done this their entire career, 30 years in the tech industry writing code. And they love it. And they're like, you cannot get this out of my hands, like GitHub Copilot, because this makes me so much more productive. All of the redundant, boring things, I don't have to do them. And then I can think of more interesting things. So I think that's actually the way to think about this. And yes, jobs will change. But look at every every revolution. When the printing press, I don't know if you know it, when the printing press was invented, there was massive chaos because people were like, this is the end of the world and what will this mean and all of this. But guess what? The printing press helped so many people. Now you could now everybody could read books or have access to them or do things like that, versus there's a select few people who have this information, who write them, who do it, right? So all of these changes have a lot of cries, but yeah, professions change, right?
Thank you.
Hi, Fatima. I'm Owais, and I'm visiting from Pakistan. I am a CEO of eMamba, a services company that's actually working with Microsoft as well. I have two parts question, Junaid, if I'm allowed to ask two parts question. One is, you just talked about developer productivity, which obviously is a problem we are trying to solve today with the co-pilots of the world. But what is going to happen 3 years, 4 years from now? What is your sort of best take at what is the future of a developer? How are the human developers going to evolve? And how is AI going to disrupt the landscape of writing code? That's the first part of the question. And the second one is, looking back at your career, one of my personal passions is to develop people and develop leadership. Can you think back and suggest the quintessential readings or material that you found really profound in terms of what inspired you and shaped you as a leader? Thank you.
If I forget the second question, remind me. But when I think of kind of in the developer space, right now, some of what they're doing is, you want to write a little bit of code, some boilerplate code, some mundane code that shows up. What you will expect more and more is that the developers will spend more time on kind of the systems level architecture, because the regular code that needs to be written is going to be written much more easier. But across the systems, what does it mean? How does it all connect together? Those are the kinds of things that will become more interesting, more important. Which is true. You think of Excel, you think of a bunch of these things that previously calculators, right? There were people who were doing all of this manually when the initial the moon landing and all of those. The people who were in most demand were the ones who were doing math calculations sitting down, right? So it's the equivalent of the same thing. You think about it. It's the simpler things are now being done, so you can look at the more higher level constructs of what that will mean. That's really how I look at it. The other one, when you think about it, is which is is something that I think we talked about at Build, which is the GitHub workspaces, which is the idea that it's not just, and this is what you will see in general happening with AI is, right now they're solving point-in-time tasks, right? Like, I need to go write this particular code, I have the Copilot, it shows up to this. I need to write this document, I give it a prompt, it kind of does it. So you are starting to solve pieces in the middle. I think the big breakthrough or the big thing that we all think is going to happen is it's all going to be connected. So in some ways, you will have your agent or you will have your AI, and with that AI, you will have learned things together, like an AI that is supporting you, supplementing you, complementing you in what you're doing. And so that will do a whole bunch of things on its end. So which means even on the developer side, when you look at it, it means that it will not just kind of write the code for you, but it will know, here's the services that I need to launch, here's the things that I need to do. All of those things will get connected all together. And that's why you see all of these co-pilots from the Microsoft side. And the vision is at some point they all kind of get their separate co-pilots, but they know how to talk to each other. They know how to connect with each other. They know how to connect with things outside. So that's really, and again, at the end of the day, it's productivity, right? You will be able to do far more things in shorter amounts of time. And there is no shortage of problems we need to solve, right? There was a second question.
Quintessential reading on leadership and...
I don't, honestly, I'm not a good person for that. I've read some books, but I don't learn by reading books. I learn by talking to people, and I learn by doing things. So what I can tell you is some of my mentors that I have learned a lot from, that I have watched over the years. I feel one of the ones that I've absolutely, I had the extreme privilege of working with Kevin Scott. Not just he was my manager, but honestly, he was a terrible manager. He never did any of the HR things that they asked him to do, like don't write the performance review. He was like, I'm never doing this. But the thing that he was absolutely good at was he was an amazing mentor, coach, and sponsor. And so I feel, and because of that and what I did, I had the privilege of being in the room with him constantly and watching him and learning from that. And I feel I have learned so much from him, how to be deeply technical, how to be pushing the frontiers of technology, but be very grounded in humans and what this means for humans and what do you care about, treating people well. Understanding what the impacts to society are, what is the footprint and that we are leaving kind of really around us. So when I look at all of these things, that's where I think about it. Who are the people and the leaders that I have been able to work with very closely or watch or just kind of witness? And that's where I feel like when I see them doing things, that's where I learn the most.
Yes, hi. When you talk about responsible AI, that's really encouraging because I founded a quantum LLM company, and I went to Stanford for responsible quantum. So people in the management position, decision-making positions, they're thinking about how to be inclusive. They worry about the quality of the distribution of technology for remote places like you mentioned. So that's really encouraging, but to solve it practically, what are the practical things that you think we can implement to actually be inclusive, all those people who are kind of not on the forefront of technology?
I think a few things. One, I think right now, and anybody who's working on this AI space knows these models are very expensive to not just to train, but even to use, right? They're expensive. If we want people all over the world to be able to do things with them, we have to really work on cost effectiveness, right? Even honestly, even when you think of the big companies, Google put Gen AI related answers, then they took them away, then they did because this stuff is expensive and nobody's really figured out how to make money on it. And guess what? Big tech will figure out some bizarre business model or the other to make this work. But what about the rest of the world, right? So I think that is going to be the fundamental thing that we need to do in kind of getting this democratized. Two, I think the other thing which I'm actually very excited about some of this work is if everybody, we think okay, the developers are starting to get out of jobs to the point of there are no jobs, but the first set of people who actually work themselves out of jobs are applied scientists and AI applied scientists, because instead of everybody having to train their models, you have these big foundation models, right? So you take away, and so in that way, not everybody needs to be an AI person to be able to leverage that, and that's the next set of things. How do we make sure that this technology is packaged in a way where you don't need specialized knowledge in any other way. So you don't need to be an AI expert, but maybe you're just a developer. And what are the right developer frameworks, libraries, systems, things like that, that will make it so that everybody who is building like a mobile app or a website somewhere has access to these tools in the same way. So I think about that, like how do you build these systems around us that really, really help in all kinds of ways. And then I think the other one is to get access is, I think we have to help solve the problems that are different parts of the world. I think right now, which requires figuring out things like how do we make sure right now the data that these models are trained on is mostly kind of what is on our internet. Well, there are plenty of these parts of the world where their data is never digitized, so it's actually not as part of these models. So which means that their learning or their common sense or their values are not showing up. And so I think that's another thing is as we think of training the next set of models is, are we making sure, and you find this actually, Microsoft started to do partnerships with, say, the governments in the Middle East, in Africa, where they're like, we want to digitize our stuff about our language, about our thing, and we want the model to consume it. And you could say, like, it's against the general grain of where everybody's like, you can't use my data to train it. They're like, but if you use my data to train it, it means that my information's in there as well, so it helps value, right? So there's lots of different things that we need to be able to do for people to get it really easy for everybody to understand it. I think that's why, honestly, why ChatGPT kind of kicked off really well. It wasn't that you don't have these tools already or you don't have the models, the interface, like what is the interaction model where anybody can go use the power of a model to say, go do something blah for me. I think those will be other breakthroughs. It'll be the user experience kind of points of view that will come. So yeah, lots of work to do.
We have 5 minutes, so maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And I need time for another question.
Assalamu alaikum. Fatima, it is wonderful to have you as a Pakistani woman just making a big difference in America. So proud of you. And Junaid, you too. My name is Samina Sundas, and I am a Pakistani Muslim American woman who is doing peace building and community building for the last 30 years. So we need to be in every field so we can just make a difference in every field. Because if we are not at the table, we are going to be on the menu. So the important part is that for women leadership, it would work much better if men are supporting that. Look in this hall. There are a lot more women than men. I appall, for people to just, take the time to empower your women, your daughters, your sisters, your mothers even. Mothers have time. They can do a lot of work. But let's not make them feel like they're retired and they're useless. They can do a huge event because empowering, taking care of the neighbors is the best way you can be an ambassador of Islam. Absolutely. So I am really happy for men who are here. Thank you for being here. Next time, please bring your friends, your colleagues. Say there is an amazing event happening for women. Let's support them. Thank you all.
Absolutely. No, I think allies are very important. Honestly, when I'm 5 minutes into meeting Junaid, I knew everything about his wife. It was incredible, and the way he talks about it. And I think that's what you need. You need allies. You need men who are so in awe of the women who are in their lives and kind of what they can do. And that you absolutely, you need a village and you need the men to be part of it, right?
We are just scared of women like Fatima, so that's why.
Hi, Fatma. Hi, Junaid. Thanks for having me. I'm not Pakistani, but very happy to be here today. So I'm building in healthcare, and I'm building specifically with a lens on women, women's health, and women's aging. And so we're leveraging AI to bridge the gap between the health that happens at home, which is most of our health, and then clinical care. So I always love hearing about a woman building in AI. And one of the things we see in our work is that there are massive data sets that are just missing. They're missing on women's
Absolutely.
bodies. They're missing on how we need to be treated. They're missing on our well-being. So I think focusing a little bit less on what's missing, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for AI when it comes to empowering women in all sets of life?
I think this is very interesting because I recently had a very depressing conversation with somebody. She has a startup on women's health, and she was saying that just the investment is mostly on men's health. And she said something to me about you're 45, in about 10 years you will lose some parts of your body that are female specific ones because there is not enough science on them, and everything fails when you get older. Your body starts degrading, but there is not enough science, versus if you were a man, there would be a much higher probability that they would figure it out. So yeah, it is actually very, very true. I think specifically I've also been fortunate enough to be kind of involved in and talk to a bunch of people at the Gates Foundation. And one of the very inspiring leaders there, who is also a Pakistani, is Anita Zaidi. She is head of gender equality at the Gates Foundation. She reports directly to Bill Gates, right? She has a background in vaccines and science. And she's leading a bunch of these things across the board about what are the things that we need to specifically do around women to help them. I think on the tech side as well, this is a known fact. This is when in Bangladesh, when they started to give microloans, they realized if you give those microloans to women, you get the whole community uplift versus you give it to men. No offense to the men, but this is the data that they have. So I think that recognition that we have to, if you want to uplift communities and societies, you have to empower the women, because when women do it, they basically will be able to, they don't just uplift themselves, they look at their families, they look at their kids, they look at their communities, they find those jobs. So I look at it and say, what are the things that women have full plates? We're constantly busy between motherhood, between being a spouse, doing all of those things. Are there things that we can do that make their lives easier, where they can spend time doing other things? That's when I think about it, it's really that. If you think about it, even if how do I help somebody who's sitting in Africa, is I sit on the West Coast. If somebody can organize my life for me, so I know when I have to drop my kids, when my husband has to do it, when I can pick them up, and what is some appointment that I need to do, all of that cognitive load that I have on my head that people don't think about, right? You're oh, did you actually drive? No, it's not the drive. It's the figuring out the logistics of what are their entire summer camps for both kids through the summer vacation. Do you know the amount of energy that went into doing something like that? So I think of those kinds of things. And honestly, maybe that's selfish because that's kind of my life as well. But again, I feel those are, because again, sitting where I sit, I feel we all want to go help everybody in the world, and we will. But I think there are things that we can do very much right now in those kinds of things. So that's where I kind of spend time on. I think on the healthcare side, absolutely. And that's where I look at people like Anita and the work that they're doing on the Gates Foundation and kind of what that means in that space. That is going to be super helpful. But yeah, and I've talked to others like that as well.
Thank you very much. I do want to touch on what Samina said. I think you're so right. A woman's cognitive brain is constantly thinking so many things. I've seen this in my wife and my mother also, and you also, that I'm sure you're talking and you're thinking 10 other things right now. What's happening and what do I have to do right after getting off the stage and all this stuff. So one request for men here and the men who are not here is, when, at least I try to do it, but I don't claim to be the best of the husband because there are 100 better men than myself. If you find a small moment to appreciate what all the women are doing, the women in your life, the girls in your life will go very far and places where you cannot even imagine. So I think that's what we do need to do, and thank you for bringing that up. I totally agree with that part.
Yeah.
I know we are out of time.
The one thing I will touch on, because I know I spend a lot of time doing this, and I know Ariba touched on this a little, is I do spend a lot of work with Palestinians, and that is something that is near and dear to my heart. The one thing I will say is, where I'm involved in it as well is I feel like in some ways we are getting polarized on both sides, where I spend a lot of time talking to people who don't agree with my view and not being offended or pushing them on hard stances, but trying to understand where they're from and trying to shift from where they are at. So that is the one thing that I will tell all of you is, as we think of it, and there are all kinds of activism that you do in there, but I think it's very, very important to try to bridge the gap. So like even the things that I do at Microsoft, it's about we can all agree we want the students in Palestine to also have the same economic opportunity that everybody else has. What can we come together and do this? Like that's where so I think that's the one thing I will say on that topic is, as we kind of do a whole bunch of stuff, have the dialogue, have the conversations. I know Junaid and I were talking, he did a bunch of that stuff as well. But I think that is going to be very, very important in helping change people's perspectives or having them see other things. Because you have to understand, everybody has a strong emotional reaction. We have our own emotional reactions. But there are things that we have been brainwashed with. There are things that those people have been brainwashed with. And so you have to kind of bridge past the the emotion to actually talk to people and understand. Because there are the people who think they have a strong reaction to what they think about as well, right? So have that dialogue, and I think it will make things better.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Thank you very much. We are out of time, of course, and I've been getting this warning. I do like to thank the co-chairs. I don't know where they are. Oh, there we go, Iman and Ariba, for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. You are an amazing and wonderful person. Audience is amazing. What great questions. I'm so glad that the 9 other questions that I have would not have done justice as what they did. And thank you very much for coming, giving us the opportunity to listen to you. And I hope you guys can talk to Fatima more. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Fatima.
No, thank you so much for having me.